Welcome back to the Scotti-BYTE channel, and this is Scott. So the t-shirt that I have on today reads, "What are clouds made of?" And it says Linux servers mostly. So today's discussion is going to be about Ubiquiti Unifi gateways, both cloud gateways and non-cloud gateways. And so here I'm at the Unifi Ubiquiti store, and on that store we have a series of their gateways. So devices like the Dream Machine Pro and the Dream Machine and the Dream Machine Pro Max and the Dream Machine SE are all cloud type devices, even though they don't have cloud in their name. But when you see devices like Gateway Lite or Gateway Pro or Cloud Gateway Fiber, notice the difference in that the word cloud is used in the name, whereas Gateway Fiber does not have cloud in the name. So the difference between a device that has cloud in the name basically means that that device is running Unifi OS, and therefore it has the applications like the Unifi Network Controller, potentially things like Unifi Protect and Unifi Talk and Unifi Access. So devices that do not have those in the name either have to run a network controller self-hosted and remotely, or they're going to run a from a cloud key, and the cloud key will provide Unifi OS, and it will also provide the network controller program. So what this video is about is that recently Unifi has released what is called the Unifi OS self-hosted release, and it's touted as a release for managed service providers. Here I'm logged into unifi.ui.com, and what we're looking at here is the network controller program for my Ubiquiti Unifi UDM Pro. And so the UDM Pro, although it does not have the name cloud in the gateway, is a system that is a cloud gateway. And the way we can tell that is if we go down to the gear and we go down to control plane, and you can see that I'm running Unifi OS version 4.3.6 on my UDM Pro, and then it has a number of applications that run under Unifi OS, namely the network controller that we were just looking at, Unifi Protect, which is the camera NVR type program, and then Unifi Talk, which is their VoIP phone system. Optionally, other things like Unifi Access and Unifi Connect, Interspace, and still others that are not listed here. Since I'm logged into unifi.ui.com, I can come up here in the upper left-hand corner and go down to Site Manager. And since I manage a whole series of other types of sites out here, I either have the ability to manage them or view them. And one of the things you'll notice over here is that I have one site that says Unifi OS Server, and this is the self-hosted Unifi OS server that we're going to learn how to install and configure today. If I go ahead and click on the network option in there, it will go ahead and list this with this icon, which indicates that you can manage multiple sites underneath it. And so if I go down to the gear on the Unifi OS server and I go over to the control plane, right now the only things that you can do are manage the server itself, manage the network controller program, and then also Interspace. As of this presentation in early August 2025, they are not yet supporting the ability to do Unifi Protect or Unifi Talk here. So I mentioned earlier that one of the reasons that you might want to run a Unifi OS server is to manage the non-cloud gateway. So how are non-cloud gateways normally managed? And the answer is you either use a cloud key or you use a self-hosted version of the Unifi Network Controller program. But with this option, we have the ability to manage more than one non-cloud gateway through the Unifi OS self-hosted server. We also have the ability to use things like Site Magic. One of the reasons I went about doing this video is because I read online where people were having difficulty hosting the Unifi OS self-hosted environment in either a Proxmox LXC container or an Incus because of a variety of problems. And that just encouraged me to see if I could get around those, and I was successful in configuring it. So one of the first things you want to do, and we're going to address Incus here, if we log on to an Incus server, we want to do an ls mod and do a grep for Mac VLAN. And so the purpose of that is that we want to make sure that your server has support for Mac VLAN. In this particular case, my Incus server did not have support for Mac VLAN, so I'm going to do a sudo mod probe Mac VLAN. And now when I go back and do an ls mod and grep for Mac VLAN, you can see here that the support has been loaded. However, if we reboot the server, that will not exist. So we also want to make that persistent by echoing Mac VLAN, and we're going to do a sudo t into the modules file so that the Mac VLAN module is loaded the next time that we reboot. So the Mac VLAN module being loaded on your Incus server is a prerequisite for the Unifi OS container. Now we're ready to create our container with an Incus launch images :Debian/12, which is Debian bookworm. We're naming the container Unifi OS. We're using the default profile, which tells it where to create the root device, and then we're creating or using the bridge profile. We created the bridge profile back when we did Incus container step by step, and the bridge profile allows for the container to get an address on the main LAN. We have boot.autostart equals to true, which means that when the Incus server starts, this container starts. And security.nesting equals to true because it means that this container is going to have nested virtualization inside of it, and the Unifi OS container runs a Podman container inside of it. Podman is a virtualization system similar to Docker. And then security.privileged equals to true because we're going to require certain privileges to access certain features of the Incus server host. And likewise, security.syscalls.intercept.sysinfo is equal to true, and it also provides access to some host features. And then I have a series of raw.lexc keys that are set, and if you can imagine, it took me right at about 12 hours to perfect the proper creation of this container to host Unifi OS. Now that our container is created, we go ahead and use the Incus shell command to move to a root prompt inside of that container. One of the first things you want to do anytime that you create a new container or install a new operating system is you want to go ahead and update the repositories and take any upgrades to the operating system. We're going to go ahead and install some dependencies here with an apt install curl, wget, podman, kmod, which allows us to affect the loading of kernel modules, the nano editor, net-tools, and OpenSSH-server. Now that our dependencies are installed, it's time for just a bit of an explanation. Unifi OS, as a hosted application, uses Podman, and Podman is a container engine that is daemonless. So Podman containers run directly on the OS, and they don't require a centralized daemon like Docker D. used via the Docker socket at /var/run/docker.sock. And that means that basically there is no centralized engine that manages all of the containers. And although Unifi OS uses Podman, Podman cannot list Unifi OS containers because their application that Ubiquiti has designed, called UOS Server, is managing that container independently. Once I got the Incus container options set up properly, like I do here, I had just a few more problems. And one of the problems I had was that just like Docker, Podman uses an overlay file system, and their overlay file system is not by default supported over ZFS. And recall that if you followed Incus containers step by step and created your Incus server, the default storage pool is using a ZFS file system. We are going to change the default storage pool for Podman so that it does not have problems being overlaid on top of the Incus ZFS storage pool. And we're doing that with an echo-e, and we're going ahead and adding the commands driver equals VFS to change the default driver of Podman to be VFS, and we're setting run root and also graph root. Once we've done that, we have to go ahead and make sure that those two folders exist. So we're doing a make dir on /run/containers/storage, and we're also doing a make dir on /var/lib/containers/storage, and the -p creates it only if it doesn't exist. Next, I'm going to go ahead and add myself a user account with an add user Scott. Go ahead and give Scott a password. Verify that password. And then we'll do a user mod -a capital G sudo Scott, putting Scott into the sudo group. And then we're going to do an su space -- Scott, which will move over to the Scott account and into the Scott home folder. Just as a little side subject here, I found it interesting that in Debian, if you do an ifconfig, even though we loaded net-tools, you see that it says command not found. So we have to go ahead and change it. So we add the path /usr/bin or /sbin over to the .bashrc file, and then we do a source .bashrc to go ahead and re-execute it, just as though we log back in. And now if we do an ifconfig, our command will work. So now all we have to do is go ahead and install the Unifi OS self-hosted package, and we're doing a wget to the location where the package is. As of August the 5th, 2025, this is the first release of the server, and it's version 4.2-23. We want to grant the downloaded file execute privilege with the chmod +x, and then we execute the installation package with the sudo // in the name of that file. It goes ahead and asks for my sudo password because it requires sudo during the installation, and I go ahead and say yes, I want to proceed. When the installation is complete, it will tell you what the address of the server is, and that will be the address of your container, and it's port 11443. They also tell you to add yourself to the group down here, and the group that they ask you to add yourself to is something called UOS Server. So we'll go ahead and do that with the sudo usermod -a UOS Server Scott. And then in order to get that to take effect immediately, I can go ahead and issue the command new group or new grp UOS-server. And then if I type groups, you can see that that group is listed in the listing here. Now you would think that at this point, since this program is running, and as I mentioned earlier, if we do a sudo podman ps-a, it doesn't list any containers. And the reason for that is because that container is managed by the UOS application that's been installed. So don't be surprised if you don't see it here. One of the first things you want to do is head up to your Unifi network controller program and go into the clients section and type in the address of that container that we just created, and mine was 172.16.1.123. And when that comes up, in my case it says Unifi OS because that's the name of the container. You want to go ahead and click on it, click on the gear, and move down here and turn on a fixed address and apply the changes, which makes it a DHCP address reservation. The DHCP address reservation is important because we don't want the address of our Unifi OS changing, since we're going to have consoles that are going to be logging into it and expecting to find it at a fixed address. Now we're going to go ahead and head over to a new tab, and we want to do an HTTPS. That's right, not HTTP, but HTTPS : the address that we found for our container we just created, and then : 11443. When you hit enter, you're going to get this classic "your connection is not private," and that's because the container has a self-signed certificate. Go ahead and click advanced and click proceed. And once you do that, it will come up to the Unifi OS server setup. I'm going to go ahead and name my server test, and I'll go ahead and click next. And then it asks for my creating an account, which of course already we're assuming that you're a Unifi user. And so we're going to go ahead and click sign in instead. And when we click sign in, I'm going to go ahead and go up here to my Bitwarden, and I'm going to find my sign in for my Unifi Cloud, and I'll go ahead and tell it to autofill. And then go ahead and click off I understand and agree to the terms of service, and then I click sign in. And then it goes ahead and says that it sent an email notification for my 6-digit code, but I'll go ahead and click this here and find my one-time password code, and I'm going to go ahead and let this run on down, and it will go ahead and reset. And now I'll go ahead and grab the latest code, and that changes every 30 seconds or so. I go ahead and paste that code in here, and it signs on. Now, it gives you an option to restore from a backup. We don't want to restore from a backup. We want to continue without a backup. And then it goes ahead and says that it's setting up Unifi OS. After a relatively short period of time, it will tell you that the setup is complete and you can now manage your Unifi OS server from anywhere. So we'll go ahead and click Go to Dashboard, and that will go ahead and bring up the dashboard. Since I don't like going blind here, I'll go ahead and click on the dark screen option in the upper right hand corner, and here we have no access points found. And if I go down here to my devices, Unifi devices, we don't have any because we have not yet adopted any. And again, just as a reminder, the only ones we can adopt are the non-cloud gateways, because the cloud gateways already have Unifi OS and a Unifi network controller built into them. So I'll go down to the gear here, and it says that I have one site, and that site is called the default site. The beauty behind the Unifi OS management console is you can manage multiple sites, effectively making you a managed service provider. So now we can click Control Panel, and we'll see that we have Unifi OS server, and it says it's up to date, running the latest version as of August 5th, which is 4.2.23. And then it says that the network application can be updated. So I'll go ahead and click to update that and say proceed. And then it also gives you the option to install Interspace. Now, interestingly enough, we don't have the ability to install or manage Unifi Access, Unifi Talk, or Unifi Protect. And it may be that those are futures, but for right now, we just have these basic options. After just a couple of minutes here, it goes ahead and tells us that our network is up to date. Now I want you to notice up here that we signed on to our controller with a local address. However, if I go back here to my second tab, which happens to list my local console, the UDM Pro, if I go from here and I click in the upper left-hand corner, since I'm on unifi.ui.com, and I go back to the site manager, if I go down through this list, or I actually don't have to go down through this list, there is a new Unifi server over here called Test. And now if we go into the network on it, we're accessing it through unifi.ui.com. And the reason that this is significant is because we have many more options here. If we go over to settings, we can look at the control panel here, and we'll see that we have all of our integrations and everything else that we're expecting to see. For right now, two of the most powerful features that this brings to the table is that your Unifi OS server allows you to manage multiple sites inside of it, each site having its own network controller. And so here we have everything on the left-hand side grayed out, and that's because I haven't adopted any devices, and so therefore we don't have anything in our one empty site that's been created. But now, the other thing that I think is really powerful is if we go back up to Site Manager and we look in Site Manager, here we have Site Magic, which is Unifi's name or Ubiquiti's name for SD-WAN. And so the SD-WAN that they support is a hub and spoke, or for most home enthusiasts, you're going to use the mesh variety, and you can go ahead and say get started. And in here you can give your network a name, or your group, your mesh group, a name if you will, and then you choose which devices you want in it. In this particular case, I've only got mine here, but if I had adopted another controller, or another gateway I should say, to my Unifi OS controller, it would show up down here, and then I would be able to do a Site Magic connection between them. And Site Magic is more powerful than a site-to-site VPN, and the primary reason for that is because if you happen to be running on something like a double NAT scenario, like let's say Starlink or T-Mobile Home Internet, you know that you don't have a WAN address on that machine or on that internet service connection. And so SiteMagic doesn't care about that. It can still create a connection between your sites, and as long as one of those sites has a connection to the internet, then you'll be able to reach it from all of the other sites. So this is a really powerful capability here. During the course of this video, I was going to show you how to move an existing non-cloud gateway over from a self-hosted Unifi network controller over to the new Unifi OS instance. But I felt like that was a little bit more in depth. What I plan to do, however, is to provide the step-by-step steps necessary to accomplish that in the end of the show notes. So if that's something that you're wanting to do, you'll want to go take a look at the show notes. Anyway, that's it for today. Please subscribe and like to the channel, and don't forget to hit your notification bell, and we'll see you next time.